Welcome back to PARC FERM, the Canadian Formula One podcast. My name is Drew, and I'm here with my boy Tomas, and we are going to be dissecting the dynamic twists from the latest race in Suzuka. First, we're going to delve into the high tire degradation at the track and how it played into the hands of the teams that wisely saved their hard tires for the race. We're also going to talk about Yuki Tsunoda and his strategic drive, managing to secure points both at his home race, despite some tough competition and being overtaken by Ocon, Bottas, and Hülkenberg before the red flag. But not all teams had a day to remember. Alpine's challenging season took another hit with both drivers colliding on the first lap, ruining their race early on. Meanwhile, Williams faces some large repair bills and some tough decisions after Albon and Ricciardo's lap 1 crash. This, coupled with Sargent's FP1 gravel excursion. We're going to talk about how these impact the rest of the team's season. Speaking of, Danny Ricciardo, we're going to question whether his recent setbacks could jeopardize his future in F1, especially with his early exit in Suzuka. And he hasn't matched Yuki Tsunoda's point finish. And so, we're going to talk about Danny Rick's future in F1. Lastly, we're going to talk about Mercedes, and we're going to analyze their struggles with 7th and 9th place finishes. What strategic changes are necessary for them to challenge Ferrari and McLaren for that coveted second spot in the Constructors' Championship? So, Mr. Tomas, let's just do a quick recap of the race. How did you like it? What are your initial thoughts, buddy?
It was all right. It was a pretty interesting race. Obviously, Max Verstappen won again. That kind of took away a little bit of the fun. Overall, it was decent. Sergio Perez came to the bat as well. Surprising. Ferrari was not too bad. Yuki Tsunoda had everyone's attention. Danny Rick had a lot of people's attention for the wrong reasons. It was a very, very decent race. That's short and sweet. Decent race.
I concur. You know what? I think that this was one of the best races that I can remember in recent history. We can go back to 6 months ago, which was the last time they raced in Suzuka, and I think that's a good kind of point too, where we can compare apples to apples in terms of like how the teams are performing in relation to like where they were this year or last year at this time. And so, I think you touched on Sergio Perez there a little bit, and I think that that Checo, this was definitely his best outing of the year in terms of his relation to Max Verstappen. Only being a 10th back, sometimes even less per lap. Obviously, over the course of 53 laps, that kind of equated into a bigger gap. But realistically, I think this is one of his better showings. And considering his contract's done at the end of the season, this is Checo's seat to lose now. There was a lot of chatter last year about him not even making it to the end of last year, and here he is showing up in a big way to help out Max and Red Bull for their Constructors' Championship. So let's get into it a little bit. Let's talk about Yuki Tsunoda. What did you think about his drive?
Amazing. For someone like Yuki, got my hopes up. Really started to shine. The last couple races really started to shine in my eyes. Just the way he's performing, it seems like he's grown, maturity, drive, everything. And I really want him to succeed and get into a better team or a better car. The sad reality is I don't think Red Bull is going to look at him, which it sucks, right? I still, for whatever reason, I think Red Bull is just like, yeah, he's our backbench guy. He's not ready for it for whatever reason. I think that's not fair. And I think if Yuki wants to stay in the sport, he needs to start exploring his options as well, because he's outdoing them. He's outdoing Danny Rick in performance and the drive, and is just wasting his talent essentially being there.
Yeah, I think, this year, Yuki's definitely, started right back where he left off, which was, high performing, and especially in terms of outperforming his teammate. He had a few teammates last year. I guess, my big question and thought is like, what else does Yuki have to prove? He's done everything. Like, he's, in my opinion, extracted almost everything out of that car that he can, especially, like I said, if you compare that to, the other drivers that he's been sitting with. And Danny Ricciardo this year has just been pulling out absolute duds compared to Yuki. And it's kind of too bad to see his talents go to waste at a team like this. But the reality is like, if we stop and think about it, what are we going to suggest that where he goes? Like, is there another option that is better for him? Is it a potential for him to go to the Stakes Albert Kick team, for 2025? Is that, to be a co-pilot with Valtteri Bottas? Is that going to be a move? So I'm very interested to see what happens to Yuki. But, in terms of him, showing up for his home race and squeezing out those points, I thought that was an absolute menacing drive out of him. And I think, it was said to mention in his pit stop how he thanked his pit crew profusely for that, because they got him in when all four of those drivers came in, and he was able to have a very quick, timely, and precise pit stop, which allowed him to get out in front of all four of those drivers and allowed him to do that two-strop strategy that saved him a bunch of time. And he was able to make those two sets of hards last for the rest of the race. And he had to baby them a little bit, but he got everything done that he needed to be.
It was an amazing drive from him. Honestly, like
stellar,
I said, it really,
stellar.
yeah, it blew my mind. I was hoping that he would show up, but I was not expecting that. So it was awesome. It was really nice to watch.
Yeah, cheers to Yuki and to him in front of his hometown fans. I'm sure that was one of the best things in the world for him to be able to do. And I know we're cheering for him to get 10th place and getting a point, but like we'd mentioned in previous podcasts, the reality is that those little points at the end of the season are going to be worth tens of millions of dollars. So any points that those bottom teams can squeak out is huge. So let's head out to Alpine's garage. Let's talk about Alpine a little bit and their struggles. They did bring a big upgrade this race in Suzuka, and they had a whole new front wing, because they're having some troubles with their weight, which is affecting their performance. So they came out with this brand new wing, and everything worked the way it was supposed to, and they were still underperforming. Right, like Ocon and Gasly finished just in front of Logan Sargent, but I don't know if that's a feat to be cheering over, because Logan Sargent's a whole other breed that we'll talk about in a little bit. But what do you think Alpine's future looks like, at least for this season? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Grim, very grim. The start that they had, man. Like, if we're talking about Alpine and comparing it to Williams, that says a lot, man. They finished behind Logan Sargent. That speaks volume. Going a little bit off topic, I'm still shocked. Teams like that are allowed to be in, but Andretti, Cadillac, it would dilute the sport. It's I'm still a little bit salty about that. But besides the point, it's not looking well. I don't know what they need to do in order to improve, because clearly the upgrade was not really improving. Like you mentioned, they struggled with weight. How can they bring you down? Well, they can't really. Besides, they can't really bring you down unless they try some sort of a different upgrade. And even then, it's probably going to be minimal. So I think it most likely will come down to driver skill and how they're able to handle those cars, because the last couple races were very, very disappointing from them.
That's a great segue, because what I think the reality is that Alpine's drivers are the best part of their team. Like, I think Gasly and Ocon are two of the most underrated guys on the grid. So with all these, driver contracts coming up at the end of the year, do you think Gasly and Ocon are trying to fight for a drive to stick around? Because right now, Ocon is outperforming Gasly and outqualified him every race and has outperformed him every single race this year. So do you think that, both of those guys have a future at Alpine, or do you think they're going to try to go elsewhere for a different seat at a different team?
I think what Gasly did, leaving Visa Cash App or AlphaTauri or whatever, going to Alpine, I think that was his mistake, first of all. Second of all, the way they're doing it right now, the way the team is performing right now, I would think they would be looking at their options. I don't think they would want to stay where they are right now and being essentially some races, the new Haas finishing last, finishing behind Williams. That's not a great achievement per se. So I would say maybe they're putting everything they got, trying their best, whatever the car has to offer, and hoping they get recognized or seen by other teams. And someone's going to talk to them, or they're going to talk to them. Someone's going to make an offer, and they're going to jump ship. That's what I'm hoping, and that's what I think might end up happening.
Follow-up question: where do you think they're going to go?
I have no idea. There's going to be so much.
Where would you like to see them go?
Gasly. Gasly is a good driver. Same with Ocon. Is okay to see them go any team on the grid essentially.
Yeah, anywhere where there's an opening.
I don't know. That's a good question. Gasly, I don't know why. I would love to see him at a Red Bull. That's probably not going to happen. I know he was in Red Bull a little bit before. He wasn't performing that, but that would be interesting to see him again there. It would be very, very funny if he ends up again in Daniel Ricciardo's seat. He does that switch back. That'd be hilarious too, but I don't think that's going to happen.
I think Liam Lawson's got that seat earmarked before he does.
I really hope so, because Liam did show up to the pitch and he did perform. But I don't know. I don't know where I want those guys. I don't want them sticking around Alpine, because they're boring to watch, and there's nothing good from that team from the first couple of races that we've seen. I'm sorry to say this.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on. I think we've touched on Alpine enough, and we beat them up enough in this podcast and a few of our other episodes, but deservedly so. They haven't shown up at all this year, and they've been struggling from the beginning. And even with their upgrades, it has improved their performance compared to themselves, in the previous race. But the reality is they're nowhere near where they need to be in order to be a competitive team on the grid. Let's shift gears and head over to Williams. So, Williams has had some chassis issues, obviously since the last couple of races. And, Albon and Ricciardo got in a crash in their first lap, and Logan Sargent got in an FP1, gravel hit. And so, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on the rest of Williams' season? Because, truth be told, they've been shipping that chassis from Australia back to their headquarters in the UK, and then they had to ship that chassis back to Japan and Suzuka. They've now had to ship that chassis back to the UK, and then they got to ship it back this week for China. So I know between the cost of repairs and the cost of shipping that they've almost exhausted their entire chassis budget for the year. So what do you think that has as an implication for Williams in the remainder of the year? And do you think that this is going to hinder them in future developments and bringing upgrades to the car for the rest of the 2024 season?
First of all, I don't even know how they could have such a logistical nightmare with what they have right now, with shipping the car back and forth, and missing parts and all that stuff. It's going to be a logistical nightmare for sure. It already is a logistical nightmare. It's going to affect everything on them. There's time constraints. There's pressure. There's pressure on the drivers, pressure on the mechanics, teams, supply, everything. It's a lot of wasted time where I think it could be spent somewhere else, developing the car or improving the car or analyzing the car or the drivers, and it's being essentially taken away in this chassis repair. I don't know how would they even improve besides, not crashing the car or not making stupid mistakes, because what they're doing right now is just not making sense. They're depleting their energy, their budget, and I don't have high hopes for them. I don't see them improving anytime soon.
Do you think that a driver like Albon and Sargent, when they're under pressure because they know that if they crash the car, it's going to cost them and could definitely hurt their car's future, at least for the remainder of the season, do you think that affects their ability to drive their car to the fullest?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it not only affects their ability to drive the car, they always have that little voice in their set essentially saying, almost like pressured, like, don't fuck up. If you fuck up, there's chassis damage, like you're fucking over everyone essentially. So I think they have to be extra careful while driving these cars. And kind of sucks for Williams, since Logan Sargent's not the best driver on the grid. He has a habit of crashing. So especially for
He's
him, it's
actually the
scary.
worst. He's
Yeah.
the worst driver on the
So
grid. Yeah.
exactly, to your point. So it's even more scarier for him to even drive that car, just with what's everything going on there. So yeah, it affects everything, and it even looks bad. I think it even looks bad on the drivers themselves, what they are driving, and if they keep crashing and they can't. Again, same thing comes back to the same point. They can't really perform to their fullest.
I think that the drivers at Williams are going to have a tough time progressing any further throughout the season. The car needs to be developed throughout the year. They learn something from, whatever race they just did. They send those details back and they make modifications to make the car faster in whatever turns, and, however they develop these cars, and all of their money. And, with Williams, there's obviously a limited budget there. They're not one of the high spending teams. So, I think it's just really going to take away from the future potential. They're just going to be playing catch up, I think, for the rest of the year, which is highly unfortunate, especially for Alex Albon, who actually has a chance in getting points in any particular race, right? Then I don't want to see it being a lost cause, because I'm a really big fan of James Valls, and I think he's a great manager, and I just think that they kind of got themselves into a pickle so early on in the season that it's unfortunate, because I think it's actually going to hinder the rest of their season in a big way, unless they find some money somewhere.
I totally agree. And like what you mentioned, it would suck. It sucks for Albon, especially because he performed relatively well last season, and now essentially he's, from what it seems like, he's jumping into a whole new car and he can't perform very well. And he's giving everything he got, and it's the performance is not there. So,
and you know what, like it's that scenario too, where we can assume that Logan Sargent's going to crash the car or he's going to do something, and that is what it is. But I think Alex Albon is clearly the better driver in that pairing.
yeah.
And I think that there's just things that happen, like when him and Ricardo made contact in the first lap in the second turn. It had nothing to do with Alex Albon, but his car was taken out of the race, and he hit that wall with not crazy impact, but enough that he was out of the race, and there was some damage done there. Do you think that there's things like that are avoidable, by not having Logan Sargent on the team? Like, Albon's going to have these one-off incidences, but he's not really, the type of guy to be putting that car into walls. But is Logan Sargent becoming a liability to the point where Williams needs to really think about getting rid of him?
That's a great question. I was genuinely surprised when they renewed Logan's contract for this year. I thought he was going to be done, but James Valls saw something in him, and for whatever reason decided to renew his contract, which I think was a shock to everyone. Is Logan Sargent becoming or will be a liability to Williams? 100%, man. Even he finished last race without crashing, but even then he had a spin out, I think, or he went off track a little bit. So even then, he's still making these stupid mistakes, man. And like you said, mistakes happen to everyone, but every single race you have a spin out or a crash. Come on, that's not a mistake at this point. You're just not skilled. You suck. Yeah, he needs to. They need to cut him fast. Sometimes I wish these other teams had Red Bull mentality or Visa Cash App. You're not performing, you have X amount of races. If you're not performing, you're out. There's going to be other people that are willing to take your seat and might even perform better than you. So I don't know what they're thinking about keeping him this year, essentially, because I am almost willing to bet anyone he's going to have more crashes, he's going to have more spinouts, and there's going to be at least, at the bare minimum, one DNF from him this year, at least.
And I think too that, kind of on another tangent, I think, with that empty seat at Mercedes and Kimi Antonelli being, the first draft pick right now for that seat, Toto Wolff's being a little bit hush and tight-lipped about it, but he is saying that, Kimi's definitely the number one choice going into next season. do you think there's an opportunity for Kimi Antonelli to take the, maybe the last half or at least some of the season in that Williams seat for Logan Sargent? Do you think they would put him in there to get him a little bit of time in an F1 car?
That would be amazing if they would do that. If I think if Logan keeps on fucking up a lot, Williams might have to sit at a table and really, decide what's worth it. Logan continuing to fuck up for the rest of the season, or hey, maybe we give this new kid a shot and see what he can do with our car. Even get him some experience. Yes, that's a very strong possibility that Antonelli might get a drive or should get a drive for sure. I think he deserves that.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, as far as the development program that that Mercedes has and their close ties with Williams and pushing the guys through, I think that's a very realistic possibility, at least for the end of the season. Because I think, that seat, from what Total Wolf said, has been earmarked for Kimi Antonelli for Mercedes for next season. So we'll see how that develops. But let's move on to the other party in that Williams RB Cash App crash, which was Danny Ricciardo. We questioned last week whether his setbacks could jeopardize his future in F1. And, given his early exit in Suzuka, do you think that he was, assuming that he finished the race, do you think that he could have pushed Yuki Tsunoda, or do you think he would have ended up in the race, finishing further down the points than Yuki did?
I don't think he would have been able to challenge Yuki. Same, it almost seems like he has that energy, same as Valtteri Bottas. He doesn't care, or he just doesn't want to perform, or he lost confidence after this race that we just had. I don't see him sticking around in F1 any longer. He might. I don't know if this is confirmed or not. Like the ultimatum, like 3 or 2 more races left to decide this future. I don't know if that's confirmed, but if it is, maybe it's good.
This was one of those. So
Yeah.
let's hope that that's not true, because if he had, 2 or 3 late races left and, he's out in the first lap, second corner, that's not a good look.
Exactly. So just by seeing this, it's like we talked last in every podcast, we want to see him succeed. We cheer for him. We love him. But man, the cold hard truth is, if you're not performing and if you're doing stupid mistakes, you're not pushing the car the way he is, not performing, not really pushing the car, there's no future for you, man. And you could argue, he's not in the best team and whatnot. Yeah, but neither's Yuki, and Yuki's outperforming him almost in every way. He's done. In my eyes, he is done. I don't think he's going to recover unless he pulls a miracle out of his ass, which, again, I don't see that happening.
Based on his quality performance and what he looked like in FP1, I thought that Danny Rick looked good for the race. I think that something in him has kind of triggered a little bit, and he was able to get that confidence back. And unfortunately, looking over his left shoulder when he should have been looking over his right shoulder going into that second and third turn at Suzuka kind of ended his race a little bit early. And that's super unfortunate because, like you just mentioned, I think that Danny Rick is a great personality to be on the paddock and, in F1. And we all love to see him, and especially on Drive to Survive. I think he's the hero on Drive to Survive. But I don't think he's got a lot of race left in him. I hear a lot of excuses and I don't hear a lot of solutions, right?
Yeah.
Like, they were talking about over-engineering the car. And, it was the same stuff that he was talking about at McLaren. And, he's singing the same song again at RB. And I don't think he's running out of runway. The runway is shortening and shortening for Danny Rick. And, especially with someone like Liam Lawson nipping at his heels, that it's just kind of like, it's too close. And I think that Liam could put a little bit more attention back to RB in a positive light. Because I think right now they're getting a lot of attention and it's not the one that they want. And, like you mentioned, Yuki's been outperforming Danny Ricciardo since he got in that seat again. You know what I mean? There might be 1 or 2 one-off, but I just don't think that that Danny Rick has what it takes to outperform Yuki in any fashion. And that's that's not what RB and Red Bull's about.
Yeah.
They want people that'll push each other, and this should be going back and forth and back and forth. And I guess the same argument could be made about a team like Alpine. You know what I mean? Because like you got Gasly and you got Ocon, who are both great drivers, but like Ocon's been outperforming Gasly all season. You know what I mean? And I know it's still early. We're not even a quarter way through the season, but from my humble opinion, I think that Ocon's outperforming Gasly, and I think that they have a better chance of finding a future in Formula One, where I think Gasly's kind of falling to the wayside a little bit because he's struggling with that Alpine car, and I think that Danny Rick is struggling in that same way.
And it's really weird how like the younger drivers per se, or the more junior drivers, are outperforming the more senior drivers. It should be the other way around. And so something's not clicking with Danny, something's not clicking with Gasly. And like you said, you can't really blame the car for both instances. Something with their performance is lacking, whether that's confidence or they're afraid of their teammate, almost, essentially. Like they think their teammate is like after their seat, which in reality that might be true, but that should give you more fire to fight for it. And it seems like it's just getting to their head and they're almost giving up.
I think it's an adaptability factor, right? Like I think Lewis Hamilton is guilty of this himself, right? Like Lewis Hamilton has not been able to adapt to this new Mercedes car as well as George has, right? And then you have a younger driver like Yuki Tsunoda being able to adapt faster to this car than the older pairing of Danny Ricciardo. And then when Liam Lawson comes in, also a younger driver, he's outperforming Yuki, right? And then you have somebody like Oscar Piastri, who I would argue is in some ways been outperforming Lando Norris. So I think these younger drivers have this ability to kind of get into a car, and instead of being mad at the car and saying, build this car to fit the way I drive, they're able to get in it and be like, oh, okay, this is how to extract the best performance out of what I've been given. So I think there's a lot of an adaptability portion of it that makes sense to these younger guys coming through the ranks that maybe some of these old guys, that old dog new tricks thing, right? And so some of these older drivers don't have that ability to kind of make adaptations on the fly. But, speaking of Mercedes, now that we're in that, let's talk about them struggling. They finished 7th for George and 9th for Hammy. And, I think their strategy call was the right one. Like, I think they saved their hard tires for this race, which ended up being the right call. I don't know if their execution was there. And even with the upgrades that they've brought this year, I'd heard that Toto Wolff said they're finally at the 4th race in the season. They're finally at the point where they should have started the season in. So they're kind of starting the season on their back foot, which is unfortunate because then you have the likes of McLaren and Ferrari and obviously Fernando Alonso in that Aston Martin, outperforming them all the time. Right. And so like, I guess my question for you is like, what kind of changes do you think they're going to need to make in order to even almost be competitive? Like, do you think that they, at this point in time in the season, have a shot at competing against Ferrari and McLaren and even Aston Martin at this point? Obviously, I think because, Lance Stroll isn't in the points as consistent as George and Hammy are. So I don't think that Aston Martin's going to be fighting them in the constructors. I think they will beat them. But I think personally that Mercedes should be in that top position behind Red Bull. Like they should be in the second seat. And now you have Ferrari running away with it and McLaren looking like they're doing a much better job on a consistent basis. Like, do you think that Mercedes has that ability to bounce back by this point in the season?
I think it is too early to tell is the short answer. But they have been struggling for what now, 2-3 seasons. They're not really performing where they should be. You can blame it on the car. The strategy is there. I'm going to say for the most part, the strategy is there. The team, is good on that part, but something with the car is not performing. Lewis was having a lot of trouble. So was George at points. The upgrades were either coming a little bit too late, as you said it, they brought out the upgrades where they should have started this year. come on, man, that's a step backwards, I should say. It almost seems like it. Can they compete with like Ferrari and stuff and Red Bull? I don't think so. From what I'm seeing, again, it's a little bit too early to tell, but I don't have high hopes from them, especially what you said. Alonso's outperforming them, man. McLaren is doing really well too. Ferrari's on the whole new level. Red Bull, we're not even going to talk about Red Bull, but unless they pull again a white rabbit out of their hat, I think they might be even behind Aston Martin this year, just from what I'm seeing so far.
So you know what? Let's take jump over to the Ferrari team for a second, because Ferrari has been over and above Mercedes, over and above McLaren, over and above Aston Martin consistently this year. Like, they are looking like the clear number 2 for the year. Do you think that Charles Leclerc is the number 1 driver at that outfit right now? Like, do you think that Charles Leclerc is the better of the 2 drivers? Because if you look on paper, he's not.
I'm glad you asked this question, because I like them both as drivers of their personalities, but in my eyes, even before everything was announced, Mr. Carlos Sainz looked like the smarter, safer, better move on Ferrari's part. And when they decided not to renew his contract, I'm not even going to talk about Lewis Hamilton, how he got the seat, but when they decided not to renew his contract, I was kind of shocked. The way he's performing this year, and holy shit, man, he does not. It's almost like, I do not give a fuck mentality. Like, there's a fire that lit up in him. Maybe it's just something that happens. You know what? Like, you fired me. Okay, just watch what I'm gonna do now, and he's just on it. And he's now maybe, and I really hope Ferrari is thinking to themselves, man, have we done the right move? Maybe we should have signed him on for another year or two. Hamilton maybe could have waited, but they rushed it. And from the last couple of years, their strategy, we are all making fun of their strategy and saying the strategy shit during the races, but I think their strategy during the races improved, but their strategy with the drivers right now is a little bit of a clown show. I don't think that was the right move. I think they just wanted a high popular name in that seat, and then it kind of worked out for Lewis too. Mercedes wasn't performing, and here's another shot. Ferrari offered him some crazy perks, crazy opportunities. But no, Ferrari did not make the right call between Leclerc and Sainz. Sainz is way better in my.
I'm going to defend Ferrari here for a minute, because Ferrari does have Charles Leclerc signed until 2029. So he actually has the longest contract out besides Max Verstappen, who's a 2028. So they've committed to Charles. So, if Ferrari was going to make a move, Carlos Sainz was the only option, right? And when you have somebody like Lewis Hamilton knocking at your door saying, hey, I want to wear red next season, you say, yes, Sir Hamilton, anything you want. And so, unfortunately, even if Carlos is better on paper and has been performing, as an absolutely amazing quote unquote second driver, he had to go, right? They want the clout, they want the attention that Lewis brings. And so I think, it was more of a case of circumstance than anything that Carlos had to go. But what I think that Carlos is doing right now is setting himself up for any seat next year. Like, he can literally go into any seat next year and take it. I think even Checo's seat. I think that if he wanted to knock on Red Bull's door and say, hey, I would be a better second driver, they would take it. Now, whether or not Max would let that happen, I doubt it, because I think he'd be more competitive against Max Verstappen. So I guess let me ask you this question then. Carlos Sainz, where do you see him going next year? Because I think he's going to be the driver to talk about. There's 12 drivers up for renewal in 2024. Where do you think Carlos Sainz is going to land now that the season's kind of played out a little bit? I know we talked about it briefly earlier, but now that, we're a little bit further into the season and Carlos has continued to perform at a high level, where do you think he's going to go?
I see him going to two teams, either Mercedes or Aston. It would be very interesting if he would end up at Mercedes. That would be a fun switcheroo. Chances are it's not going to happen. Now, if Fernando Alonso leaves to Mercedes, and if Mercedes takes him, and if he goes to Aston Martin, that'd be very, very interesting too. Do I see him ending up at Red Bull? Like you said, possibility, but highly, highly unlikely. I just, a personal opinion, I just cannot see him in a Red Bull racing suit. And besides what you said, I think it would be very, very competitive with Max, which would be a good and a bad thing, obviously. So I would think it would be either Merc or Aston Martin Racing. That's where I see him going. I don't see him going anywhere else, honestly.
I think
can't picture him going anywhere else.
I think Mercedes is going to go more future oriented. Originally, all fun and games, I really wanted to see, Fernando Alonso jump in that seat for 1 or 2 seasons. But I think if Fernando is going to be making a move anywhere, it has to be a front running team, because he's not going to jump into another sideways move where they're performing almost equally as Aston Martin. Do I think that, someone like Fernando Alonso could extract more from the car than somebody like Lewis Hamilton or George Russell? I don't know. Maybe he could perform a little bit better in the Mercedes he's given. But I just can't imagine Fernando Alonso jumping ship anywhere else for a mediocre seat. He just wouldn't do it. And I don't foresee Lance Baby Stroll going anywhere. Right? Like, I think that with Daddy running the team, he's not going to go anywhere, which means there's going to be no seat for Sainz unless Fernando Alonso's gone and retired. And I think, like I'd mentioned just briefly before, I think Kimi Antonelli is going to be the seat, or the driver for the seat for Mercedes, because I think they're going to start gunning for the future. I think 2025, if it ends up any way that they've, kind of landed right now in 2024, it's going to be silly season for them. And they might as well get this kid in some F1 experience before the rules and regs changes in 2026. So I don't know, man. It's a very interesting situation. And I'm, I listened to Total Wolf kind of talk about the driver pairings, and the drivers are starting to heavily talk with some of these teams right now, and contracts are going to get signed in the next few races. And so I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because as one driver starts announcing that they've been signed with teams, we'll have a better idea about where things are going to piece together. But I think right now there are so many choices and options for these guys that we would just be kind of, blindfoldedly throwing darts at a board, and then, we can do all of these predictions, the if ands, until the cows come home. But the reality is we have no idea. We have no clue at all. So, I guess that's kind of wrapping it up. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Just kind of side note, while speaking about Sainz, I know Audi's coming into play too. That's another possibility for him. I don't see him coming. I don't see him going there, or if he does go, that would be quite shocking, because new team essentially coming in, so you don't know how they're going to perform. Other than that, I don't have anything else to add. Looking forward to their next race, and more great entertainment, and more results, and hopefully some contract signings, like you said.
For sure. Do you have any shout outs you want to do? I know we were talking about it in the Discord. I want to shout out my boy Victor. We got my boy Mike Zanin. I know he's a constant listener. We got Deshaun. We got a couple of the dudes out in the Discord channel to give them a shout out. You got anybody you want to give a shout out to?
I'm just going to give a shout out to my main guy, Mr. Lucas. He's a big supporter of our channel too. He watches, he listens. So thank you so much, Lucas. I appreciate it.
We love that. The PARC FERM fam. I get down like that. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Like, subscribe. Please jump in the Discord. We have all the links in the show notes. So please take a look. Share the YouTube. It really helps with the algorithm. We really appreciate it. And next week, hopefully, we're back with the full crew. We're gonna have Walker in house. We're gonna have Ed in house, and we're really looking forward to it. So that's it. Ciao for now.